Hello, boys and girls. My name is Mrs. Woolsey, and I teach at the Waynesville 6th Grade Center in Waynesville, Missouri. That's South Central Missouri. And I'm going to read to you for a few minutes one of my favorite books, and this is called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's part of the Chronicles of Narnia, and it is by C.S. Lewis. Chapter 1. Lucy looks into the wardrobe. Once there were 4 children, whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. He had no wife, and he lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret, and Betty, but they don't come into the story very much. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair, which grew over most of his face as well as on his head, and they liked him almost at once. But on the first evening when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him. And Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. As soon as they had said good night to the professor and gone upstairs on the first night, the boys came into the girls' room and they all talked it over. "We've fallen on our feet, and make no mistake," said Peter. "This is going to be perfectly splendid. That old chap will let us do anything we like." "I think he's an old dear," said Susan. "Oh, come off it," said Edmund, who was tired and pretending not to be tired, which always made him bad-tempered. "Don't go on talking like that." "Like what?" said Susan. "And anyway, it's time you were in bed." "Trying to talk like mother," said Edmund. "And who are you to say when I'm to go to bed? Go to bed yourself." "Hadn't we all better go to bed?" said Lucy. "There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking in here." "No, there won't," said Peter. "I tell you, this is the sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes' walk from here down to that dining room, and any amount of stairs and passages in between." "What's that noise?" said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than she had ever seen before, and the thought of all those long passages and rows of doors leading into empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. "It's only a bird, silly," said Edmund. "It's an owl," said Peter. "This is going to be a wonderful place for birds. I shall go to bed now. I say, let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see those mountains as we came along? In the woods, there might be eagles, there might be stags, there might be hawks." "Badgers," said Lucy. "Foxes," said Edmund. "Rabbits," said Susan. But when the next morning came, there was a steady rain falling, so thick that when you looked out the window, you could see neither the mountains, nor the woods, nor even the stream in the garden. "Of course it would be raining," said Edmund. They had just finished their breakfast with the professor and were upstairs in the room he had set apart for them, a long, low room with 2 windows looking out in one direction and 2 in the other. "Do stop grumbling, Ed," said Susan. 10 to 1 it will clear up in an hour or so, and in the meantime we're pretty well off. There's a wireless and lots of books." "Not for me," said Peter. "I'm going to explore in the house." Everyone agreed to this, and that was how the adventures began. It was the sort of house that you never seemed to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places. The first few doors they tried led only into spare bedrooms, as everyone would have expected they would, but soon they came to a very long room full of pictures, and there they found a suit of armor, and after that there was a room all hung in green with a harp in one corner. And then came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, and then a little kind of upstairs hall, and a door that led out to a balcony, and then a whole series of rooms that led into each other and were lined with books, most of them very old books, and some bigger than a Bible in church. And shortly after that they looked into a room that was quite empty except for one big wardrobe, the sort that has a looking-glass in the door. There was nothing else in that room at all, except a dead blue bottle on the windowsill. "Nothing there," said Peter, and they all trooped out again, all except Lucy. She stayed behind because she thought it would be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe, even though she felt almost sure it would be locked. To her surprise, it opened quite easily, and two mothballs dropped out. Looking into the inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and feel of fur. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in among the coats and rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course, because she knew it was very foolish to shut oneself up into a wardrobe. Soon she went further in and found that there was a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. It was almost quite dark in there, and she kept her arms stretched out in front of her so as not to bump her face into the back of the wardrobe. She took a step further in, then 2 or 3 steps, always expecting to feel the wood against her fingertips. But she couldn't feel it. This simply must be an enormous wardrobe, thought Lucy, going still further in and pushing the soft folds of coats aside to make room for her. Then she noticed there was something crunching under her feet. I wonder, is that more mothballs, she thought, stooping down to feel it with her hand. But instead of the hard, smooth wood of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. This is very weird, she said, and she went on a step or 2 further. Next moment she found that she was rubbing her face and hands against something that was no longer soft fur, but something that was hard and rough and prickly. Why, it's just like the branches of trees, exclaimed Lucy, and then she saw that there was a light ahead of her, not more than a few inches away, where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later she found she was standing in the middle of a wood, at night-time, with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe, and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from where she had set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it is a very silly thing to shut oneself up into a wardrobe. It seemed to still be daylight there. I can always get back if something goes wrong, thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, over the snow, and through the wood toward the other light. In about 10 minutes she reached it, and found it was a lamp-post. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamp-post in the middle of a wood, and wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of feet coming toward her. And soon after that, a very strange person stepped out from among the trees into the light of the lamp-post. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow. From the waist up, he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like a goat's. The hair on them was glossy black, and instead of feet, he had goat's hooves. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not notice this at first because it was so neatly caught up over the arm that held the umbrella so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler around his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face, with a short pointed beard and curly hair, and out of the hair there stuck 2 horns, one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I have said, held the umbrella. In the other arm he carried several brown paper parcels. What with the parcels and the snow, it looked just as if he had been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a fawn. And when he saw Lucy, he gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all his parcels. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the fawn. Chapter 2. What Lucy Found There. "Good evening," said Lucy, but the fawn was so busy picking up its parcels that at first it did not reply. When it had finished, it made her a little bow. Good evening," said the fawn. "Excuse me, I don't want to be inquisitive, but should I be right in thinking that you are a daughter of Eve?" "My name's Lucy," she said, not quite understanding him. "But you are, forgive me, you are what they call a girl?" asked the fawn. "Of course I'm a girl." said Lucy. You are, in fact, human? Of course I'm human, said Lucy, still a little puzzled. To be sure, said the fawn. How stupid of me! But I've never seen a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve before. I am delighted. That is to say, then it stopped as if it had been going to say something it had not intended, but remembered in time. Delighted, delighted, it went on. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Tumnus. I'm very pleased to meet you, Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy. And may I ask, daughter of Eve, said Mr. Tumnus, how have you come into Narnia? Narnia? What's that? Said Lucy. This is the land of Narnia, said the fawn, where we are now, all that lies between the lamppost and the great castle of Claire Paravel on the eastern sea. And you, have you come from the wild woods of the west? I got in through the wardrobe in the spare room, said Lucy. Ah, said Mr. Tumnus, in a rather melancholy voice. If only I had worked harder in geography when I was a little fawn, I should no doubt know all of those strange countries. It's too late now. But they aren't countries at all, said Lucy, almost laughing. It's only just back there, at least, I'm not sure. It was summer there. Meanwhile, said Mr. Tumnus, it's winter in Narnia, and has been for ever so long, and we'll both catch cold if we stand here talking in the snow. Daughter of Eve from the far land of Spare where eternal summer reigns around the bright city of Wardrobe, how would it be if you came and had tea with me? Thank you very much, Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy, but I was wondering whether I ought to be getting back. It's only just around the corner, said the fawn, and there'll be a roaring fire and toast and sardines and cake. Well, it's very kind of you, said Lucy, but I shan't be able to stay long. If you would take my arm, daughter of Eve, said Mr. Tumnus, I shall be able to hold the umbrella over both of us. That's the way. Now off we go. And so Lucy found herself walking through the wood, arm in arm, with this strange creature, as if they had known each other all their lives. They had not gone far before they came to a place where the ground became rough, and there were rocks all about, and little hills up and little hills down. At the bottom of one small valley, Mr. Tumnus turned suddenly aside, as if he were going to walk straight into an unusually large rock, but at the last moment Lucy found he was headed toward the entrance of a cave. As soon as they were inside, she found herself blinking in the light of a wood fire. Then Mr. Tumnus stooped and took a piece of flaming wood out of the fire with a neat little pair of tongs and lit a lamp. Now, we shan't be long, he said, and immediately put a kettle on. Lucy thought she'd never been in a nicer place. It was a little dry, clean cave of reddish stone, with a carpet on the floor and two little chairs, one for me and one for a friend, said Mr. Tumnus, and a table and a dresser and a mantelpiece over the fire, and above that a picture of an old fawn with a gray beard. In one corner there was a door, which Lucy thought must lead to Mr. Tumnus's bedroom, and on one wall was a shelf full of books. Lucy looked at these things while he was setting out the tea things. They had titles like The Life and Letters of Silenus, or Nymphs and Their Ways, or Men, Monks, and Gamekeepers, a Study in Popular Legend, or Is Man a Myth? Now, daughter of Eve, said the fawn. It really was a wonderful tea. There was a nice brown egg lightly boiled for each of them, and then sardines on toast, and then buttered toast, and then toast with honey, and then a sugar-topped cake. And when Lucy was tired of eating, the fawn began to talk. He had wonderful tales to tell of life in the forest. He told about the midnight dances and how the nymphs who lived in the wells and the dryads who lived in the trees came out to dance with the fawns, about long hunting parties after the milk-white stag who could give you wishes if you caught him, about feasting and treasure-seeking with the wild red dwarfs in the deep mines and caverns far beneath the forest floor, and then about the summers when the woods were green. Not that it isn't always winter now, he added gloomily. Then, to cheer himself up, he took out from his case on the dresser a strange little flute that looked like it was made of straw and began to play. And the tune he played made Lucy want to cry and laugh and dance and go to sleep all at the same time. It must have been hours later when she shook herself and said, "Oh, Mr. Tubness, I'm so sorry to stop you, and I do love that tune, but really, I must go home. I only meant to stay for a few minutes." "It's no good now, you know," said the fawn, laying down his flute and shaking its head at her very sorrowfully. "Oh, good," said Lucy, jumping up and feeling rather frightened. "What do you mean? I've got to go home at once. The others will be wondering what happened to me." "We have to stop there for today, but I wonder what's going to happen to Lucy. Make sure you finish this book. I think you'll really enjoy it, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's part of a 7-book series called The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. Have a great love of reading day. Bye."